You know that moment when life decides you've gotten a little too comfortable? Mine arrived on a random Tuesday morning in November, delivering a punchline I never saw coming. Picture this. Me, standing in the kitchen in my favorite bathrobe. The one with coffee stains that have practically become part of the fabric's design, watching my husband of 12 years pack up his golf clubs, with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning. "Honey," Brad said, without even glancing up from his beloved titanium driver, "I'm leaving you." "Oh, and I sold the house." I blinked once, twice, then waited for the just kidding that never came. "You sold our house?" I asked, my voice calm enough to sound like I was commenting on the weather. "Yeah, got a great offer. Cash buyer. We close next Friday." That's when he finally looked up. And I swear the man was smiling. Actually smiling, like he'd just shared the news of winning the lottery instead of casually announcing he'd made me homeless. Now I should probably clarify that I'm not what anyone would call a dramatic person. I don't throw things. I don't scream. I don't even cry at movies. Well, except that one time they discontinued my favorite yogurt flavor. That stung. But as I stood there, watching my husband treat our marriage like some garage sale item he couldn't wait to get rid of, I felt something I hadn't in years. The urge to laugh, not because it was funny. Oh no, because it was so absurd that my brain refused to process it any other way. "Let me get this straight," I said, setting my coffee mug down with surgical precision. "You're leaving me, you sold our house without telling me, and you're happy about it." "Well, yeah," he replied. "Sarah and I found this amazing condo downtown. 2 bedrooms, city views, granite countertops." "Sarah," I interrupted. "Sarah from your office?" "Yeah, you know Sarah. Blonde, tall, legs for days." He said it like he was describing a car he'd just leased, not the woman he'd been sleeping with behind my back. I nodded slowly. "Ah, yes, Sarah, the one who looks like she gets her personality from a Pinterest board titled, 'Basic, but make it expensive.'" Brad frowned. "That's not very nice, Mel." "Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to be nice about your affair?" I took another sip of my coffee, which now tasted suspiciously like betrayal with a hint of vanilla creamer. "How long has this been going on?" "About 6 months," he said, zipping up his golf bag. "Look, we both know this marriage has been dead for years. We're just making it official. 6 months. 6 months." While I was planning our anniversary dinner, he'd been planning his escape route. While I was researching couples counselors, he'd been consulting real estate lawyers. While I was trying to fix us, he'd been busy breaking us apart in ways I couldn't have imagined. "And it didn't occur to you to, discuss this with me first?" I asked, somehow managing to keep my voice steady even though I felt like a snow globe someone had just shaken. "Come on, Mel. Be honest. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you looked up from your laptop long enough to even notice I was there?" The words hit like a slap, mostly because there was a kernel of truth in them. I had been working more, a lot more, but someone had to pay for his golf memberships, his craft beer obsession, and his midlife crisis wardrobe of skinny jeans and vintage band tees from groups he couldn't name a single song by. "You're right," I said, surprising him. "I should have paid more attention. I might have noticed you were a cheating, lying, house-selling snake a little sooner." His expression darkened. "You know what? This is exactly why I'm leaving. You're bitter, Mel. You're bitter and sarcastic, and you make everything about you." "Oh, I make everything about me," I repeated, actually laughing. The kind of laugh that makes people take a step back. "Brad, honey, you just announced you're leaving me and sold our house in the same breath. If that's not making everything about you, I don't know what is," he said with a shrug. "Whatever. The papers are on the kitchen counter. Your lawyer can contact mine." He slung his golf bag over his shoulder with all the casual detachment of a man, leaving for a weekend trip instead of walking out on 12 years of marriage. "Sarah's picking me up in 10 minutes. He added, "Of course she was. Wouldn't want to keep Princess Pinterest waiting." He paused at the door, and for a brief second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd say something meaningful. Something to make the last 12 years of my life feel like they hadn't been a complete waste. But no, you should probably start looking for an apartment, he said instead. The new buyers want to move in right after closing. And then he was gone. Just like that. 12 years of marriage ended with the slam of a door and the faint rattle of suitcase wheels across the hardwood. Floors I had refinished myself because Brad once insisted hiring contractors was throwing money away. I stood there in my kitchen, with its subway tile backsplash and the little herb garden I'd planted by the window, trying to process what had just detonated my life. My husband had left me for his secretary after selling our house behind my back. It was like living through a bad country song. Except instead of losing a dog, it was my entire life that had gone up in flames. I reached for the stack of papers he'd left on the counter, scanning the neat official documents that somehow held more control over my existence than I did. Divorce papers, house sale contract, an entire marriage reduced to signatures, dates, and dollar amounts. That's when I noticed something. Something that made me smile for the first time in months. Something that reminded me Brad might not be quite as clever as he thought he was. Something that was about to turn his little victory lap into a marathon of regret. Because, my dear, cheating house-selling husband had made one tiny, seemingly insignificant, but absolutely crucial mistake. But before I tell you what that was, I need to take you back to where this whole disaster really began, because, like most catastrophes, it didn't start with a bang. It began with a series of small, quiet explosions that I was apparently too blind, or too trusting, to recognize as warning signs. It all started about 18 months ago, when Brad kicked off what I like to call his midlife crisis greatest hits tour. First came the gym membership he actually used. Then came the wardrobe overhaul that made him look like a 25-year-old hipster playing dress-up. Finally, there was the sudden obsession with networking events and team-building retreats that, coincidentally, always included Sarah from accounting. Sarah, who I'd met exactly once at the company Christmas party, had introduced herself by complimenting my vintage dress. It was from Target. I'd bought it 3 weeks earlier, but sure. Sarah, tell me more about your passion for vintage fashion while you stand there in a $300 bodycon dress doing all the heavy lifting your personality clearly can't manage. Should have known something was off when Brad started caring about thread counts. This was a man who once wore the same pair of khakis 3 days in a row because they weren't dirty, just lived in. Suddenly, he's comparing Egyptian cotton to bamboo fiber like he's auditioning for a home goods commercial. Mel, did you know there are different weights of cotton? He'd ask, holding up sheets like they contained the mysteries of the cosmos. No, Brad. I did not know that, I'd reply without looking up from my laptop. Probably because I'm too busy working 60-hour weeks to research textile manufacturing. You see, while Brad was discovering the finer things in life, thread counts, craft cocktails, and Sarah from accounting, I was busy keeping our financial ship afloat. My freelance graphic design business had finally taken off, and I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed possible, which of course meant working more hours than I thought humanly possible. But here's the thing about success. It can make you invisible to the people who don't share in it. Every milestone I celebrated alone became another reason for Brad to drift further away. Every client party I attended solo became proof that I was choosing work over family. Never mind that we didn't even have kids. Never mind that my so-called work obsession was what paid for his golf lessons, his craft beer subscription, and his monthly massage appointments for his stress. The signs were all there, laid out like a breadcrumb trail leading straight to heartbreak, the mysterious phone calls he'd take in the garage, the sudden need for space in our bedroom, the way he developed selective hearing whenever I tried to talk about our future. We should plan a vacation, I'd suggest. Mm-hmm. He'd respond, eyes glued to his phone. Maybe Italy. You've always wanted to see Rome. Yeah, sure. Or we could just set the house on fire and dance naked in the ashes. Sounds great. Hun? It was like being married to a very expensive, very unresponsive piece of furniture. Furniture that occasionally asked for spending money and complained about my cooking. The cooking complaints were especially rich, considering I'd been the one keeping us fed for our entire marriage while Brad's culinary expertise peaked at opening a beer. But suddenly, Sarah was sending him to work with gourmet lunches, complete with little handwritten notes. Notes. And somehow, my homemade lasagna couldn't compete with whatever mystical ingredient she was sprinkling into her quinoa salads. "Sarah made this incredible Buddha bowl yesterday," he'd announce, as if delivering breaking news. "That's nice," I'd reply. "I made incredible mortgage payments yesterday. But the real kicker, the absolute chef's kiss of betrayal, came 6 months ago, when Brad started working late 3 nights a week. Now, I'm not a detective, but I am a woman who's been married for 12 years. I know the difference between working late and working someone else. Late, of course, I confronted him. I ripped the Band-Aid off while he stood in our bedroom packing an overnight bag for yet another mysterious business trip. "Are you having an affair?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as possible. He didn't even look guilty. Just sighed, like I was being unreasonable for daring to question him. "Mel, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" I countered. "Because you're gone 3 nights a week, you smell like unfamiliar perfume, and you've started manscaping." "Manscaping? Brad, you once told me grooming below the waist was unnatural." "People change," he said, which might just be the most infuriating non-answer in the history of non-answers. "People change," I repeated. "Okay, well, here's a change for you. I'm not buying your excuses anymore." That's when he pulled out the classic cheater's defense. "Gaslighting?" With a generous side of projection. "You know what your problem is, Mel? You don't trust me. You never have. You always assume the worst about everyone." "I'm not assuming," I said. "I'm observing." "There's a difference." "No, you're being controlling and paranoid. And honestly, it's exhausting." Exhausting. I was exhausting. Me, working 60-hour weeks to keep us financially stable while he gallivanted around town with his secretary. I was exhausting him, and here's the worst part. For about 30 seconds, I almost believed him. I actually wondered if I was being paranoid. If my success had made me cynical, bitter, untrusting. If maybe I was the problem. Then I found the receipt. Dinner for 2 at Romano's, our anniversary restaurant, on a random Tuesday in March. A meal that cost more than our entire monthly grocery budget. A dinner I definitely hadn't been invited to. When I asked about it, Brad claimed it was a business dinner with potential clients. "What clients?" I asked. "You don't know them. Try me." "It's not important. A $200 dinner is important to me." God, Mel, do you have to track every penny? Can't I just have a nice meal without the Spanish Inquisition? The Spanish Inquisition. For asking about a receipt I found in his pocket, in our house, that I was paying for. That's when it hit me. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my husband, and apparently my house too. But here's the funny thing about losing everything. It's strangely liberating. When there's nothing left to lose, you can finally stop pretending everything's fine. And I was done pretending. In fact, I was about to stop pretending in a very big way after Brad's grand exit, and really, who needs a proper goodbye when you can just announce you've sold someone's home like you're giving a weather update? I sat in my kitchen and did what any rational person would do. I Googled how to hide a body, and then immediately cleared my browser history, because I'm not completely insane. Then I did what actually needed to be done. I called my lawyer, Janet. "It's Mel. I need you to drop everything and look at some papers Brad left me." "Oh no," Janet said, and I could already hear her reaching for her legal pad. "What did he do now?" "He left me for his secretary after selling our house." "Without telling me." There was a pause. "Then, are you drinking?" "Not yet," I said. "But the day is young. I'm coming over." Janet, for context, is the kind of lawyer who wears power suits and intimidates opposing counsel just by walking into a room. While I waited for her, I decided to do a little detective work of my own. See, Brad might have thought he was clever, but he'd made one fatal assumption. that I was as clueless about our finances as he was about basic human decency. I pulled up our joint accounts on my laptop. Empty. Every single one. Well, not completely empty. There was 347.82 left in checking, which was almost more insulting than zero. He'd left me coffee money. How thoughtful. But here's what Brad didn't know. I had a separate business account for my freelance work. An account that had been quietly and significantly growing over the last 2 years. An account containing enough money to make his little house-selling scheme look like a lemonade stand operation. I'd opened it to keep my business finances separate from our personal ones, but I'd kept adding to it because, call it intuition. Call it a woman's sixth sense. Call it whatever you like, I'd sensed. This day was coming long before Brad decided to make it official. Doorbell rang just as I was calculating how much I'd earned while he'd been networking with Sarah. Janet stood on my doorstep looking like she was about to take on the Supreme Court. "Show me the papers," she said, skipping the small talk. I handed over the divorce documents and the house sale contract. She read them with the focused precision of a hawk spotting its next meal. "Oh, this is interesting," she said after a few minutes. "Interesting good, interesting bad, or interesting stupid. Did Brad handle this sale himself?" "I assume so. He's been very secretive about it." "Well, he should have been secretive about his incompetence instead." Janet looked up at me with what might have been admiration. "Mel, did you know your name is still on the deed?" I blinked. "What?" "The house deed. It lists both of you as owners, joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. But he sold it. He sold his half, maybe. If the paperwork is even legal, which I'm starting to doubt," Janet's lips curled into a grin, the kind that made defense attorneys sweat through their suits. "He can't sell a house he doesn't fully own without your signature." The poetic justice of it all hit me like a freight train made of karma and wrapped in a bow. "You're telling me?" "I'm telling you your husband just committed fraud, or at least attempted to. Either way, this sale can't go through without your consent." I sat down heavily on the couch, the same couch I'd bought with my own money, in the house that was still apparently half mine despite Brad's best efforts to make me homeless. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," Janet said, "we call the buyer and the title company to explain there's been a little miscommunication. Then we call Brad and explain that he's an idiot. Can we lead with the second one?" Janet laughed. "I like the way you think. But before we made any calls, a more pressing question came to mind." "Janet," I said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, if someone were to discover that their husband had been hiding assets and committing fraud, what would that mean for a divorce settlement?" Janet's grin widened. "Hypothetically, it would mean that someone might be entitled to a much larger share of the marital assets than they initially thought. Courts don't take kindly to people hiding money or committing fraud during divorce proceedings. And if that same someone had been financially supporting their husband's lifestyle while he was busy cheating, well, that someone might also be looking at alimony, possibly substantial alimony. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Hope. Not just hope. Power. The kind of power that comes from realizing you're not the victim in this story. "You're the plot twist. There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I need to show you something." I scrolled through my photos until I found what I was looking for. Screenshots of Brad's social media posts over the past 6 months. Photos of him at high-end restaurants, on weekend trips, at events I'd never been invited to. Posts featuring Sarah in various romantic poses, complete with dates and tagged locations. "He's been documenting his affair?" Janet said, scrolling through the images, her tone a mix of disbelief and professional glee. "And look at these expenses. Golf trips, dinners, hotels." She looked up. "Mel, how much of this was paid for with joint funds?" "All of it," I said. "I've got the credit card statements to prove it. He's been using marital assets to fund his affair." Janet leaned back, smiling the slow, satisfied smile of a lawyer who knows she's holding all the aces. That's dissipation of marital property. This just keeps getting better, I said, feeling a dangerous smile tug at my lips. Not the happy kind. The kind that comes when someone's about to learn the hard way why you never underestimate a woman who's been paying attention. So what you're telling me, I continued, is that Brad is not only a cheater and a liar, but he's also terrible at being a cheater and a liar. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Janet said. He's left us enough evidence to bury him in court. Good. I stood and walked to the window, where the big red "Sold" sign sat proudly in our front yard. Or rather, the sign that was about to become very awkward for everyone involved. Because, I said, watching the wind sway the sign, I'm about to teach my dear husband a lesson about the difference between being smart and being clever. And what's that? Janet asked. Smart people think things through. Clever people just think they're smarter than everyone else. I turned back to her with a sharp smile. Brad thinks he's clever. He's about to find out how smart I really am. The first call I made was to Brad. I could hear Sarah giggling in the background when he picked up, which added the perfect touch of tackiness to the whole situation. Mel, what's wrong? Did something happen with the house? Oh, something happened with the house, all right, I said, settling at the kitchen table while Janet sat across from me, pen in hand, ready to take notes like she was prepping for the trial of the century. Brad. Honey, I began sweetly, did you happen to read the deed before you sold our house? There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, I said, did you actually look at the ownership documents before you signed them over to strangers? Of course I did. It's my house too. Was your house too, I corrected. Past tense. But here's the thing, and I hope you're sitting down for this. You can't sell a house you don't fully own. Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that my name is still on the deed. Joint tenancy, Brad, which means you just attempted to sell half of my house without my permission. That's impossible. My lawyer said, your lawyer, I interrupted, is either incompetent or you didn't give him all the information. Either way, congratulations. You've just committed fraud. I heard Sarah in the background asking what was wrong, followed by Brad's muffled, shut up. Classy till the end, that one. Mel, you're being ridiculous, he said finally. We're getting divorced. The house has to be sold anyway. Oh, it can be sold, I said lightly. Just not for the price you agreed to, not without my signature, and definitely not with the proceeds going straight into your little love nest fund. What do you want? He asked, the panic creeping into his voice like a stain. What do I want? I repeated, savoring the words. I want you to explain to your cash buyers why they can't have their dream home. I want you to explain to Sarah why you're about to lose a lot of money, I said. And I want you to explain to a judge why you thought it was okay to steal from your wife. I didn't steal anything. Brad, you emptied our joint accounts, sold our house without my consent, and used our credit cards to fund your affair. If that's not stealing, then I don't know what is. Janet was waving her hand, silently mouthing, keep going, so I did. Oh, and about those credit card statements, the ones showing all those romantic dinners and weekend getaways with Sarah, those are going to make very interesting exhibits in court. Along with all your social media posts documenting your affair. You've been quite the photographer, haven't you? The silence on the other end stretched so long I almost thought the call had dropped. Then, how much do you want? I want what I'm legally entitled to, I said. Plus compensation for emotional distress, plus attorney fees, plus damages for attempted fraud. That's everything. Not everything, Brad, I said sweetly. Just most of it. I hung up before he could respond, feeling better than I had in months. Janet was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. That was beautiful, she said. But now comes the real fun. The real fun, as it turned out, was a conference call with the buyer's agent, the title company and Brad's lawyer, who, as it quickly became clear, had all the legal acumen of a goldfish in a law library. Mr. Williams, said the title company representative, There seems to be some confusion about the ownership of the property. No confusion, Brad's lawyer replied quickly. My client owns the house jointly with his wife. They're getting divorced. He's selling his half. But the sale contract is for the entire property, the buyer's agent interjected. My clients are expecting to own the whole house, which they can't, Janet said smoothly, because Mrs. Williams hasn't consented to the sale and has no intention of doing so at the agreed-upon price. What followed was 20 minutes of the most glorious chaos I'd ever witnessed. Brad's lawyer insisted the sale was legitimate. The buyer's agent demanded to know why this was only coming up now. The title company explained that they couldn't possibly close without clear title. And I just sat there sipping my coffee, watching my husband's so-called master plan collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. The buyers, a young couple who'd apparently been saving for years to buy their first home, were understandably upset. They'd already given notice to their landlord, arranged movers, even picked out paint colors. I'm sorry, I told them when they called me directly, but I can't let you buy a house my husband doesn't have the right to sell. However, if you're still interested, I'd be happy to negotiate a fair price for the property. What kind of fair price? The husband asked. Well, I said, considering the current market and the fact that the house has been significantly improved over the past 5 years, improvements I paid for, I'd say it's worth about 30% more than what my husband agreed to sell it for. There was a pause. Then the wife said, We'll think about it. They called back 2 hours later and agreed to my price. Turns out they'd fallen in love with the house in the neighborhood and were willing to pay what it was actually worth. Imagine that. The best part? Because I was the one facilitating the sale, I got to keep the entire proceeds. Well, after paying off the mortgage and handing Brad his legally required share of the equity, which, after attorney fees and the penalty for attempted fraud, came out to about enough to buy a decent used car. Not the BMW he'd been eyeing for his post-divorce freedom ride, more like a Honda Civic with good mileage and a reliable engine. When I called to share the good news, he was not exactly appreciative. You're destroying my life, he yelled. No, Brad, I said calmly. I'm just not letting you destroy mine anymore. Sarah and I need that money for our new place. Sarah can get a second job, I said. I hear there's always demand for Pinterest consultants. This isn't over, Mel. You're right, I said. It's not over. It's just beginning. Because tomorrow, my lawyer is filing a motion to freeze all your assets pending a full financial disclosure. And next week, we're requesting depositions from you and Sarah about the dissipation of marital property. What does that mean? It means you're going to explain to a judge exactly how you spent our money on your affair, in detail, under oath, with Sarah sitting right there next to you. The line went dead. I imagined Brad trying to explain to Sarah that their romantic weekend getaways were about to become evidence in a court proceeding. I pictured the two of them sitting at their tiny kitchen table, trying to figure out how to afford their dream condo on whatever was left of Brad's actual income after the divorce settlement. It was a beautiful image. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a gorgeous 2-bedroom loft downtown with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that Brad would have loved. If he hadn't been such an idiot, reading the final divorce decree over my morning coffee. The coffee, by the way, was excellent. Ethiopian single origin, ground fresh daily, served in a mug that says, World's Okayest Ex-Wife. I bought it for myself as a divorce gift. Because if you can't laugh at your own tragedy, what's the point of living through it? The final tally was even better than Janet had predicted. In addition to my half of the house proceeds, I got spousal support for 2 years, plus a settlement for the dissipation of marital assets. Brad also got to pay both lawyers' fees, which was a nice touch, considering his lawyer's performance had been about as impressive as a soggy napkin. The best part? The judge actually laughed when Janet presented the evidence of Brad's affair. Apparently, documenting your infidelity on social media while using your wife's credit cards to pay for it isn't considered discreet in legal circles. Who knew? Brad and Sarah are still together, by the way. They're living in a studio apartment across town, which is about all they can afford after Brad's new financial reality set in. I hear through mutual friends that they're working through some challenges, which I assume means they're discovering that relationships built on deception tend to have trust issues. Shocking, I know. Sarah had to get a second job to help with expenses, and Brad had to sell his golf clubs to make his spousal support payments. The irony of him having to liquidate his precious titanium driver to fund his ex-wife's new life is not lost on me. I've started dating again, which is both terrifying and exciting, and occasionally hilarious. Modern dating apps are like shopping for humans on Amazon, complete with reviews and photos that may or may not represent the actual product. But at least I'm not sharing my Netflix password with someone who thinks loyalty is a customer rewards program. My business has taken off, in a good way. Turns out, when you're not constantly worried about your husband's fragile ego, you can actually focus on being successful. I've hired 2 employees and I'm considering opening a real office space, the kind with a conference room and a coffee machine that doesn't require a PhD in engineering to operate. Sometimes I run into Brad at the grocery store or the coffee shop. It's awkward in that very specific way only possible with people who've seen you naked and then betrayed you. But I've developed a simple strategy for those encounters. I smile, I wave, and I remind myself that I'm no longer legally obligated to pretend I like him. The house sold to that young couple, and they've turned it into exactly what I always envisioned it could be. They even sent me a photo of the renovated kitchen, and I felt something I hadn't expected: genuine happiness. Not because I missed the house, but because someone else finally got to love it the way it deserved to be loved, which, coincidentally, is exactly what I've learned about myself. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the nature of betrayal. Not in a bitter, obsessive way, but in a philosophical, what can we learn from this disaster? Way. And I've come to a conclusion. Betrayal doesn't actually tell you anything about yourself. It tells you everything about the person who betrayed you. Brad didn't cheat because I worked too much. He cheated because he's the kind of person who cheats. He didn't lie because I was difficult to talk to. He lied because he's the kind of person who lies. He didn't try to steal my house because I was a bad wife. He tried to steal my house because he's the kind of person who steals. None of it was about me. All of it was about him. And that realization has been more liberating than any divorce settlement could ever be. My therapist says I'm processing the experience in a healthy way, which I think is professional speak for you're not setting anyone on fire. So, we're making progress. I've learned that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel betrayed. It's okay to laugh at the absurdity of it all. It's even okay to be grateful. Because here's the thing about rock bottom, it's an excellent foundation for building something better. I'm not the same woman who stood in her kitchen 6 months ago, trying to process her husband's casual announcement that he'd sold her life out from under her. I'm stronger, smarter, and significantly wealthier. I'm also funnier, though that might just be a defense mechanism. But most importantly, I'm free. Free from a marriage that was suffocating me. Free from a man who saw me as an obstacle to his happiness instead of a partner in creating it. In the end, family isn't just the people who share your DNA or your last name. It's the people who show up for you when everything falls apart. The people who celebrate your victories and help you survive your defeats. The people who see you at your worst and still think you're worth fighting for. Brad never saw me that way. But I finally see myself that way, and that, my friends, is the best revenge of all. The house always wins.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.